What if I told you that one of the most respected voices in college football just called a Heisman Trophy winner, national champion, and NFL MVP the worst player a coach ever had? And what if I told you that same coach also coached a convicted murderer? You'd probably think I was making it up. But Paul Finebaum just said Cam Newton was the worst player Urban Meyer ever coached. The same Urban Meyer who coached Aaron Hernandez. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just a bad take. This is something much deeper, much more calculated, and much more dangerous. Because when you see the pattern of who Paul Finebaum attacks and who he protects, you'll realize this has nothing to do with football and everything to do with something else entirely. Cam Newton just fired back, and what he revealed is about to change how you see sports media forever. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never listen to Paul Finebaum the same way again. Cam Newton has taken a lot of heat over the years. He's been called cocky, dramatic, overhyped. The kind of criticism that never seems to land on white quarterbacks with far less talent. But here's what's really happening behind the scenes, and trust me, once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. When Paul Finebaum, one of college football's most recognizable voices, said Cam Newton was the worst player Urban Meyer ever coached, something shifted. It wasn't just disrespectful. It wasn't just wrong. It felt intentional. Because that's not just a hot take, that's character assassination with surgical precision. Let's be real for a moment. Urban Meyer coached Aaron Hernandez, a man who ended up convicted of murder. Urban Meyer coached multiple players involved in everything from assault to academic fraud. Players who brought actual shame to programs, who made headlines for all the wrong reasons. But somehow, Cam Newton, a national champion, a Heisman winner, an NFL MVP, is the worst? Come on! That's not football talk. That's personal. That's coded. That's a message. And it's a message we've heard from Paul Finebaum before. Here's where it gets interesting. When Deion Sanders called for a nil salary cap to help stabilize the wild new college football landscape, a reasonable suggestion from someone who understands both sides of the business, Paul didn't engage in thoughtful debate. He didn't analyze the merits of the idea. He called Deion a hypocrite. He went straight for the man, not the message. And this is where the pattern becomes crystal clear. Remember Jameis Winston? Before he ever played a snap in the NFL, Finebaum had already labeled him untouchable. Lamar Jackson? Not an NFL quarterback, according to Paul. Every time a black man rises to a level of influence that can't be ignored, Paul's voice is suddenly the loudest, not to uplift, but to undercut. So we have to ask the uncomfortable question, why does Paul Finebaum keep attacking powerful black men? Why is it always Cam, always Deion, always Jameis, and never the Sabans, the Dabos, the Kirbys of the world? Why does he reserve his harshest criticism for athletes who refuse to shrink, who speak with confidence, who control their own narratives? Because here's what Paul doesn't want you to realize. He operates like he's guarding the front gate of college football tradition. And in his mind, certain people, especially those who look, talk, and move like Cam Newton or Deion Sanders, aren't supposed to have the keys. They're supposed to be grateful, silent, obedient. But this time, Cam Newton isn't taking it on the chin. He's firing back, not with anger, but with clarity, with truth, with receipts. He's done letting the media rewrite his story. And maybe, just maybe, he's exposing something bigger than a single insult. Because what Paul Finebaum said might have been about Cam, but the reaction, that's about all of us. If you listen to Paul Finebaum and a whole lot of folks who never did their homework, you'd think Cam Newton was kicked out of the University of Florida in disgrace. That's the lie. That's the lazy version. That's the narrative they've been recycling for over a decade to discredit everything Cam built since. And this week, Finebaum used it again, this time to crown Cam as the worst player Urban Meyer ever coached. But here's the truth, and I want you to pay close attention because this is where the media manipulation gets exposed. Cam Newton left Florida. He wasn't dragged out. He wasn't suspended indefinitely. He wasn't blackballed. He transferred. And he transferred for a reason that makes perfect football sense if you understand how college football actually works. Picture this. You're one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. You've got NFL-level arm strength. You can run like a linebacker. And you have the kind of leadership presence that makes teammates believe they can conquer the world. But there's one problem. Tim Tebow was already the guy. Period. The chosen one, the face of the program, the golden boy who could do no wrong in Gainesville. Urban Meyer had zero plans of letting Cam, no matter how talented, take the reins. This wasn't about ability, it was about politics, about image, about the story Florida wanted to tell. Tebow was their narrative, and Cam was just supposed to wait his turn, maybe forever. So Cam did what thousands of players do every year. He went where he could play, where he could lead, where he could grow. And here's the part that drives the critics crazy. He didn't do it with a bad attitude or public drama. He didn't trash the program or throw teammates under the bus. He did it by betting on himself, by believing he deserved better than riding the bench behind someone else's story. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the laptop incident. Cam has never denied it. A mistake was made by a young man who was still figuring out life. But the way it's weaponized, the way Paul and others dangle it like a red flag over Cam's entire career, tells you everything you need to know about their agenda. Here's what they don't want you to understand. It wasn't why he transferred. It wasn't the end of his career. And it shouldn't be the anchor they keep trying to tie his name to 15 years later. Because if Cam Newton had been a quiet, humble backup who waited his turn behind Tebow, who accepted his role without question, Paul would have praised his character and team-first mentality. But he left. He rose. He refused to accept limitations that others tried to place on him. And that's what they've never forgiven. Because in their world, black athletes are supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps they're given, not bold enough to demand the full meal. The transfer wasn't a failure. It was the first sign that Cam Newton would never let anyone else write his story. Cam Newton didn't just bounce back from Florida. He rewrote the entire blueprint for what a college quarterback could be. After leaving Gainesville, he could have faded into college football obscurity. That's what the system wanted. That's what critics like Paul Finebaum expected. That's what would have made everyone comfortable. But Cam didn't disappear. Instead, he went to Blinn College, a junior college program in Texas that most people had never heard of, and he turned it into his personal launchpad to greatness. What did he do there? He didn't just play well, he obliterated defenses. Cam put up video game numbers that seemed impossible for a real human being. He led Blinn to a national championship, and he did it with the same flair, confidence, and raw power that had been written off as problematic at Florida. He was proving a point with every touchdown pass, every rushing yard, every victory celebration. Then came Auburn. And what Cam did in that one magical year is the stuff of legends that will be talked about for generations. We're talking about one of the greatest individual seasons in the history of college football. Over 4,000 yards of total offense. 50 total touchdowns. Numbers that sound made up, but they're all real. A Heisman Trophy that he earned by dominating every defense the SEC could throw at him. An SEC championship in the toughest conference in America. A national championship that he carried on his shoulders through the most pressure-packed moments imaginable. All in one season. All while the world was watching, waiting, hoping he would fail. But here's what made it even more remarkable. He did it with style. Cam didn't just win games, he celebrated them. He smiled. He danced. He pointed to the sky. He wore the crown like it was custom fitted for his head. And he didn't apologize for any of it. The media didn't know how to handle it. They couldn't ignore him. He was too dominant, too electric, too impossible to look away from. But they couldn't celebrate him fully either. Not the way they celebrated Tebow. Not the way they gushed over Andrew Luck. Because Cam was loud. Cam was confident. Cam was unapologetically black and proud. So instead of pure admiration, Cam got suspicion. Instead of being lifted up, he got dissected. Every celebration was too much. Every confident statement was arrogant. Every display of joy was somehow disrespectful to the game. Because in their eyes, a confident black quarterback playing like a superhero and acting like he knew he was great had to be checked. The narrative had to be controlled. The joy had to be questioned. That's why Paul Finebaum's recent comments sting so much, because they've been trying to discredit this incredible rise since day one. They can't erase what happened on the field, so they try to poison how we remember it. But the numbers don't lie. The trophies don't lie. And the legacy? That's bulletproof. You would think that leading your team to a national championship would finally quiet the noise, but for Cam Newton, nothing is ever enough. Especially not for Paul Finebaum, who has made a career out of moving goalposts whenever black excellence threatens to become undeniable. Because just when you thought the media might finally give Cam his flowers, Paul jumped in with a new spin designed to taint even Cam's greatest moment. His claim? That Cam nearly cost Auburn the title by ignoring head coach Gene Chizik's instructions to take a knee at the 1-yard line and instead trying to be Superman by diving into the end zone, nearly fumbling the ball and losing it all. In Paul's twisted version of events, that moment was selfish, reckless, proof that Cam couldn't be trusted even when everything was on the line. It was the perfect story for someone determined to find fault in perfection, to discover character flaws in a championship performance. But here's what actually happened, straight from Cam Newton himself, and this is where Paul's narrative completely falls apart. That decision wasn't made in a vacuum by some rogue quarterback drunk on his own hype. It wasn't Cam freelancing or ignoring his coaches. It was a conversation between teammates who had been through war together all season long. They huddled up. They looked at the defense. They assessed the situation like the champions they were about to become. They made a call together as a team. And even if the play hadn't worked perfectly, they had a timeout in their pocket. They had control of the clock. They had options. The moment wasn't nearly as chaotic or dangerous as Paul made it sound in his desperate attempt to create controversy where none existed. Oh, and by the way, they still won the national championship. The play worked. The season ended in confetti and celebration. Auburn was on top of the college football world, and Cam Newton was the undisputed king. So why twist that moment? Why turn one of the greatest seasons in college football history into a cautionary tale about ego and poor decision-making? Why take a championship-winning play and reframe it as evidence of character flaws? Because when a black quarterback leads his way, when he calls his own shots and wins his own games, it threatens everything the old guard clings to. Cam didn't win that championship with silence and humility. He didn't apologize for his confidence or dim his light to make others comfortable. He did it with fire, with swagger, with pure, unfiltered joy. And that kind of authentic confidence has always scared the system. It challenges the narrative that black athletes should be grateful just to be included, that they should win quietly and celebrate modestly. Paul didn't want to remember Cam's greatness. He wanted to reframe it, to find the flaw in the diamond, to plant seeds of doubt about a performance that should be celebrated as one of the greatest individual achievements in sports history. But championships don't lie. Trophies don't have agendas. And legacy? That's written in permanent ink. Cam Newton isn't the only black man with a target on his back from Paul Finebaum's commentary booth. Just ask Deion Sanders, who's been dealing with the same treatment from the same voice for months. And if you look closely, really closely, you'll notice the pattern is almost identical, like it's coming from the same playbook. Paul Finebaum didn't go after Deion for a scandal. He didn't challenge a bad coaching decision or question his game management. No, he came after Coach Prime for having an opinion, specifically for daring to suggest that there should be a salary cap on nil deals. Now, let's break this down. Deion wasn't trying to limit opportunities for athletes. He wasn't being anti-player or anti-progress. He was thinking like a coach, thinking long-term about competitive balance, about creating structure in a system that's spiraling toward chaos. He was actually trying to protect athletes from a Wild West scenario where only the richest programs can compete. It was a thoughtful, nuanced position from someone who understands both sides of the business, the player side and the coaching side. But Paul didn't engage with the idea. He didn't analyze the merits or explore the implications. He skipped straight to the personal attack. Deion's a hypocrite. Deion's the problem. Deion's in over his head. Here's where it gets really interesting and really telling. When Nick Saban said the exact same thing about nil needing structure and limits, Paul nodded in agreement. When Saban complained about the transfer portal and how it was affecting team chemistry, Paul called it an important concern from a legendary coach. When Dabo Swinney said he was uncomfortable with how nil was changing locker room culture and affecting the purity of college football, Paul treated it as legitimate commentary from a respected voice in the game. But when Deion Sanders says it, now it's a contradiction. Now it's dangerous. Now it's something that needs to be corrected and criticized. See, the issue was never NIL. It never was. The issue is who gets to shape the conversation about the future of college football. And when that person is a powerful, unapologetic black man who built his own brand, created his own path, and doesn't owe the traditional media establishment anything, that's when Paul reaches for the same tired script: discredit, distort, dismantle. The double standard isn't subtle, it's glaring. White coaches can express concerns about the direction of college football and be treated as wise voices of experience. Black coaches express the same concerns, and suddenly they're hypocrites who don't understand their place. Paul Finebaum operates like he's the gatekeeper of college football respectability. He decides who gets to be taken seriously, who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who gets torn down for sport. And the pattern is clear. When black men rise to positions of influence and refuse to stay quiet, Paul's job becomes putting them back in their place. Cam Newton, Deion Sanders, same confidence, same leadership, same refusal to shrink. Same desperate attempt by Paul Finebaum to tear them down before they get too comfortable in positions of power. There was no yelling, no theatrics, no personal insults, just truth delivered with the calm confidence of a man who's had his legacy attacked more times than he can count and is finally in a position to clap back his way. "You're lying, Paul," Cam said plainly. "Please stop." In those 4 simple words, Cam Newton exposed something deeper than a media feud. He exposed the strategy behind the smears, the calculated nature of the character assassination, the playbook behind the punditry that's been used against him for over a decade. Because when Paul labeled Cam the worst player Urban Meyer ever coached, he wasn't just throwing shade or generating clicks. He was planting a seed, one meant to grow doubt in the minds of fans, scouts, and sports historians alike. One designed to rewrite history in real time, to make people question what they saw with their own eyes. But here's what Paul didn't account for. Cam's not 20 anymore. He's not a kid trying to prove himself in Gainesville, desperate for approval from the establishment. He's not the young man who had to bite his tongue while others controlled his narrative. He's a grown man now, with his own platform, his own brand, and an audience that stretches far beyond the SEC network. He's media now. He's the storyteller, not just the subject of the story. And this time, he didn't need ESPN or CBS to tell his side. He told it himself, unfiltered and unedited. He laid it all out with the precision of someone who's been keeping receipts for years, waiting for the right moment to present the evidence. He wasn't kicked off the Florida team. He transferred to find opportunity. He didn't ignore his coach at Auburn. He led his teammates in a moment of championship-level trust and execution. He didn't ruin anything. He won everything that mattered. But more than just defending his own legacy, Cam reminded us all that he's not the only one Paul has tried to erase. His response wasn't just about setting the record straight on his own career. It was about exposing a pattern of behavior that extends far beyond one quarterback's journey. What made Cam's response so powerful wasn't the anger, it was the absence of it. He didn't need to raise his voice or throw insults because the truth was loud enough. He spoke like a man who knows his worth, who's secure in his accomplishments, who's tired of letting other people define his story. "Please stop," he said. "Not fight me or you're wrong, just stop. Stop the lies. Stop the revisionist history. Stop trying to diminish what can't be diminished." And in that moment, Cam Newton reminded everyone watching that his voice, his story, his very presence is a threat to people who still believe greatness needs permission, especially when it's coming from a black man who refuses to apologize for his confidence. Paul's biggest mistake was thinking Cam still needed his approval, still cared about his opinion, still operated in a world where media gatekeepers held all the power. But that world is dying, and Cam Newton is part of the generation that's killing it. There's an unspoken rule in American sports media, one that isn't written down anywhere but is enforced with ruthless consistency across every platform, every network, every commentary booth in the country. Black athletes can be great, but they can't act like it. They can win, they can dominate, they can even change the game forever. But they better do it with a smile that doesn't threaten anyone, with humility that makes everyone comfortable, and without ever reminding anyone how hard they had to fight to get there. Cam Newton broke that rule a long time ago, and he's been paying for it ever since. From the moment he started dabbing in the end zone, showing pure joy on the biggest stages, speaking with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how good he was, the media began lining him up to tear him down. Too flashy. Too arrogant. Too immature. Too much. It didn't matter that his stats were historic. It didn't matter that he was leading his team to victories that seemed impossible. It didn't matter that kids across the country were emulating him, finding inspiration in his unapologetic excellence. What mattered to the establishment was that he wasn't playing the part they had written for him. And Paul Finebaum? He's been one of the loudest enforcers of that unspoken rule, one of the most consistent voices trying to put black athletes back in their assigned boxes. Because what he really wants, what a lot of these media gatekeepers want, is for black athletes to be grateful, not powerful. Thankful, not vocal. Humble, not confident. They want the Cam Newtons of the world to smile, stay in their lane, and accept whatever version of their story the media chooses to tell. But Cam refused. So did Dion. So did countless others who decided that their greatness didn't need anyone else's permission to exist. And every time they step outside the box the media built for them, there's someone like Paul ready to slap them back into place with a slick comment, a loaded insult, or a whisper campaign designed to chip away at their image one lie at a time. But here's the thing about legacy, it doesn't belong to the media. It belongs to the people who built it, brick by brick, victory by victory, moment by moment. Cam Newton's story isn't just a chapter in college football history. It's a full-volume epic about what happens when talent meets opportunity meets unshakable self-belief. It's the kind of journey that generations of athletes will point to and say, that's how you do it when they count you out. And no matter how many microphones Paul Finebaum hides behind, no matter how many times he tries to distort the past or rewrite the narrative, he can't erase what Cam Newton already built. The numbers are permanent. The trophies are real. The impact is undeniable. And the legacy? That's bulletproof. Let's talk facts, real, undeniable, carved in stone facts that no amount of media manipulation can change. Cam Newton is a Heisman Trophy winner. Not almost. Not should have been. He won it, decisively, against the best competition college football had to offer. Cam Newton is a national champion. He didn't just participate in a championship season, he carried his team there, through the most pressure-packed moments imaginable, against defenses specifically designed to stop him. Cam Newton was an NFL MVP. In a league full of the most talented athletes on the planet, he was voted the most valuable player in the entire sport. Not by media members with agendas, but by his peers, by coaches, by people who actually understand football at the highest level. He did it all without begging for approval. He did it without conforming to the image that college football gatekeepers tried to push on him. He wore the crown like it was custom fitted for his head, and he never apologized for knowing he was great. And now he's holding the pen that writes his own story. Because legacy doesn't live on Paul Finebaum's television set. It doesn't exist in the opinions of commentators who never played the game at the level Cam mastered. It lives in the millions of fans who watched him dominate Saturdays and electrify Sundays. It lives in every kid who copied his touchdown dance, who saw someone who looked like them calling the shots and changing the game. It lives in every young quarterback who learned that confidence isn't a character flaw, it's a superpower. And now Cam is his own media empire, his own brand, his own voice. He doesn't need ESPN to clear the air or set the record straight. He doesn't need Paul Finebaum's backhanded compliments or grudging respect. He's rewriting the narrative in real time, unfiltered, unapologetic, and undeniably authentic. When Cam said, "You're lying, Paul," it wasn't just a rebuttal to a single comment. It was a declaration of independence from a system that tried to control his story for 15 years. It was a warning shot to every so-called analyst who thinks they can bury truth under opinion, who believes they can diminish greatness through repetition of lies. The microphone belongs to Cam now. The platform is his. The narrative is his to control. And guess what? He's not handing any of it back to people who never had his best interests at heart. This is bigger than football. This is about who gets to tell the story of black excellence in America. This is about whether we let the gatekeepers continue to diminish our heroes or whether we finally say enough. Let the record show. You can hate on the man, but you can't kill the legacy. You can distort the story, but you can't change the results. You can try to tear down the monument, but the foundation is too strong. Cam Newton and Deion Sanders have already won. The trophies prove it. The impact proves it. The next generation of athletes who refuse to shrink proves it. And now we're all listening to them tell their own stories, in their own words, on their own terms.